Alrighty, thank you all for attending another wonderful session of supporting the Minnesota Cannabis License Rollout provided by the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild. I'm joined on stage today by a few industry professionals. Starting to my right here, Ryan Nosan. He's with the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. He's our government representative today. He graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth with an undergraduate degree in community health education and a master's in environmental health and safety. He spent the last 23 years working with the Department of Labor and Industry, 23 years, and the MNOSHA program. So he is a wealth of knowledge. From 2002 to 2010, he worked with MNOSHA Enforcement, and we'll talk about enforcement versus preempting the enforcement, right? But he worked from 2002 to 2010 with MNOSHA Enforcement as a safety investigator and principal investigator. In 2010, he began a supervisor position with the MNOSHA Workplace Safety Consultation Unit, overseeing MNSTAR and MNSHARP programs, and he'll talk more about that, and remained in that role until 2016. In 2016, he returned to the MNOSHA Enforcement Group as a supervisor in the Principal Safety Group and working on case settlement. These are all things we're going to be up against. In 2021, he became the director of the WSC program. What is that? WSC? Workplace Safety Consultation Program. And again, I'll have each of them kind of tell them more about themselves as well. So thank you, Ryan, for joining us. Super appreciate your time this evening. And then next year we have Cathy Hovde. She is a wealth of information. Oh my gosh, I can't even tell you. This woman has got everything you need. She's a certified industrial hygienist for resilient EHS, employee environmental health and safety. See, this is not my area of expertise, which is why I bring in these lovely people to say the right words. So Cathy Hovde is a seasoned health and safety leader with over 20 years of global experience at companies including Amazon, Caterpillar, and 3M. A certified industrial hygienist and certified safety professional, she's recognized for her transformational leadership, technical expertise, and her ability to unite diverse teams to improve safety culture and outcomes. Cathy holds a Master in Science in Environmental Health from the University of Minnesota, another U of M. Actually, all three of these folks are U of M, by the way. So a Master's of Science in Environmental Health, and she's earned multiple industry awards and serves in national leadership roles, including on the ACGIH Board of Directors. What does that mean?
They are... ACGIH is a non-governmental organization that sets chemical and physical exposure limits. So think about benzene, formaldehyde, noise, heat.
Awesome, okay. So then Cathy frequently shares her expertise through lectures and conference presentations as we are doing right now. Thank you for joining us, Cathy, and all that you bring to the table. Then we have Daniel at the end here, Daniel Volcom. He is an industrial hygiene and environmental compliance lead for IEA Institute for Environmental Assessment. So his perspective is more on the environmental side, but as we know, environment affects the people affect the environment. So it all comes together. He works with hazardous waste management, disposal, exhausting, wastewater disposal, things of that nature. So he'll tell you more about that. He also graduated from the University of Minnesota Duluth with an undergraduate degree in exercise science and a master's degree in environmental health and safety. A certified safety professional, so both of them are certified safety professionals, and certified hazardous materials manager. So he's your guy to go to for hazardous materials. He's been an environmental health and safety consultant with IEA for the last 7.5 years, and has worked EHS roles previously in woodworking, cabinetry, and printing and packaging industries. So All of these folks on the panel here do not come from a robust cannabis background. And I appreciate that because they're coming from a space of where every other industry has to operate, and that's where cannabis is trying to get. We want to operate same as everyone else, plus cannabis. Cannabis has been a satellited, siloed crop over here, but it's an agricultural product. There's workers that are working on that agricultural product. We fit into the overall picture. And so these folks come from the overall picture, and they are open and willing to say plus cannabis. And so while they might not be able to answer your cannabis-specific questions, I will be able to do some of that, and some of the other folks at the Guild can do that. These guys are more on, all of the areas that I just mentioned a little bit more here. So I'm going to take a break from talking and let each of these folks introduce themselves beyond the bio that I just gave. So we'll start off with Brian Nosan here, a representative from MNOSHA.
Thank you. My name is Ryan Nosan. I've been with the Department of Labor, so the state of Minnesota for the last 23 years. Worked specifically with the OSHA program on both sides. So from compliance, where you do inspections of fatalities, serious injuries, anything like that, to being so. When you talk about OSHA in general, right, there's two distinct sides of the OSHA program. There is the enforcement side, so basically following their strategic plan, they go and do inspections of facilities. And a lot of the strategic plan is going to be based on like injuries and illness rates, so typically high hazard industries. They also do employee complaints. They do referrals, serious injury, fatality inspections, and then just program run-of-the-mill, showed up at a facility to do an inspection. And then there's the consultation side of things where employers actually reach out directly to the unit that I work in and say, hey, we're having difficulty in this situation. We'd like to have somebody come out and help us through this, through whatever it is. We also have people that answer phones every day. I was actually talking with Dan earlier. He said he had reached out a couple weeks ago, a week ago, and somebody responded to him right away. So there's 23 staff in our group. I have 17 consultants that basically cover the entire state. And it is the services that we provide, they're free, confidential services. Like if you call us and say, hey, we'd like you to come out, I don't go over to OSHA Enforcement and say, hey, these people called us because they want us to come help, we should really go inspect them. It doesn't work like that. We have a set of guidelines, federal guidelines that basically oversee our program that we have to adhere to, and it's very strict. And if it happened to be where somebody called us and said, come out, and then OSHA compliance showed up, it is merely a coincidence. It doesn't happen. It happens, and it happens, I don't want to say every week, but it happens, on a pretty regular basis. The people that we look to service are the same people that OSHA compliance looks to do inspections of, right? So not business specific, but industry specific. So, so I'll certainly answer any OSHA related questions while I'm here, but I'll turn it over.
Hi, good evening. So again, Cathy, Hovde. I come from what I try to explain to people is I'm an industrial hygienist. And so I've spent my career in large warehousing and manufacturing operations. And with that is digging into the regulations. So you can see I have in front of me my nice thick book of the OCM regulations, and going through those to identify what really applies and what are we going to do about it. The other thing that I like to do that helps, and what I'll encourage you to do either with your teams or with help, there are multiple environmental health and safety consultants here tonight that can help you, is we walk the floor. We walk the floor, we walk the process, and we ask lots of questions. I started working with some micro businesses. I really appreciate that they explain what is hash. because apparently there are multiple definitions for hash. Thank you for reusing vocabulary to mean completely different things. Love it. But also is looking at injury and citation trends to kind of look around the corner what may be coming that you or we haven't experienced yet in Minnesota. And then with that, we identify what are the most pertinent hazards that are likely to really hurt people, and then prioritize our efforts to close those hazards so that nobody gets hurt. And then just lastly, I've had the opportunity to start working with several of the micro businesses around, helping out with some of the OCM documentation related to industrial hygiene. So as we have time later, I can talk about it if we have time this evening, or if you want to talk about it separately, we can go through that.
Daniel Holcomb. I work for IEA. IEA as a whole, we do a lot of asbestos removal project management. We do a lot of indoor air quality, mold testing as well, industrial hygiene, so personal and employee exposure sampling, environmental compliance, and we also do have professional engineers to do any sort of ventilation stuff as well. But yeah, so growing up, in this industry, it's been evolving, and the cannabis industry is really evolving right now in Minnesota as well. So really looking forward to learning more about the process and the hazards that we can help address. And then working with, Ron with MNOSHA as well. It's very cool to have representative of government here. That doesn't always happen at 6 o'clock on a Thursday night, after work hours. So I would definitely, appreciate him being here and, give your thanks to him as well. And then, thanks Cathy as well for being here. It's cool to see everyone here and answer any questions you might have. I just appreciate you guys having us on and bringing us forth to the meeting.
Great, thank you, and thank you also for reiterating that we have a government representative here at 6:20 p.m. So thank you so much, Brian, and everyone else who has been a government representative and come to our panels and will in the future. Thank you preemptively to all of you for helping lift off the cannabis community. It's a mutual benefit, right? I mean, all the government entities and agencies are trying to make regulations for us to follow. We're trying to follow them, and we need to have a feedback loop, because sometimes rules might be made out of lack of experience, boots on the ground, and oftentimes what I do in my consulting business is to liaise between the two and say, do you realize what that looks like on the ground and how unattainable that is, and they're destined for failure, and then it's like, oh, well, what is the solution? But you have to have a solution to the problem when you're coming to the table, not just this sucks and is stupid and I can't do it. There has to be a way to follow, to end up at the end goal, right? We have an end goal, and there's a lot of ways to get there. So we need to help these folks regulate us so that we can comply in a way that functions our businesses to be profitable, sustainable, and smooth out the supply chains for everyone's benefit, right? So I guess I'll introduce myself now that I've done everything else but that. So my name is Sarah Schutte. I am president of the Minnesota Craft Cannabis Guild, bringing you high-level education and resources for the craft cannabis industry. This pertains to cannabis licensees as well as home growers, caregivers, and everywhere along the way, as long as it is crafted, handcrafted, small batch, similar to like breweries or the craft brewery situation, right? Small batch, care for the environment and your employees and your self, your livelihood, and the greater good for us all, right? I also, I have another bio from another life. So I'm born and raised in Minnesota here. I moved out to Humboldt County, California in 2006, where I got my degree in soil science and then started a cannabis or an agricultural testing lab and consulting firm out there, which I ran for 10 years before selling it to Royal Gold Cocoa, who might be familiar with that soil company who uses it for their internal quality control lab, but still also supports the industry at large. And then I supported the cannabis industry as they rolled over from the medical Proposition 215 days of California into the adult use recreational Proposition 64 days on the state level, county level, whole ordeal. So now I'm here and holding space for Minnesota's whole ordeal. So I understand that there's a lot to get through. It's very complicated, very complex, and we have to band together, especially small businesses, if we want to get through this. And I know that we can, and all of you people in this room are already poised for success because you're sitting here. So thank you for coming, much appreciated. Okay, so my first question, let's see, starting off with Ryan. We're talking about, okay, so there's MNOSHA and there's federal OSHA. So there's a lot of things we talked about. There's a federal level, there's a state level, and then there's a local municipal level. So I understand there's a federal OSHA, there's MNOSHA. Can you explain the difference between the two? And then just a little slide in there trick question. Do any of the local, does it go to the local municipal level, or does it stay at the state level for OSHA compliance?
Questions?
Okay, so
Can you hold the microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Minnesota is a state plan state. So what that means is, so in order to be a state plan state, you have to be as effective as. So when you have, so basically every standard that federal OSHA has, Minnesota has to enforce all of those standards plus, and so you have to be as effective as. So we are as effective as because we have all of the 1910 standards and regulations. So CFR, so Code of Federal Regulations, 1910 is going to be the general industry standards. And then there are, on top of the 1910 standards, there's also the Minnesota rules. So Minnesota rules, a prime example would be like a the AWARE program. So it's a written safety and health program that employers, if you fall within a certain North American Industrial Classification Standard code, have to have. But there is nothing below the state OSHA program. So we are monitored by federal OSHA. So on a quarterly basis, so in consultation, we're actually 90% funded by federal OSHA. That's on the consultation side. In the enforcement side, so OSHA compliance, they have a 50-50 match. So basically they're funded to be as effective as, but they're funded 50% by federal OSHA. So that's the differences between the two programs. So like I said, we're monitored by federal OSHA on a quarterly basis. We get together. Basically, we put together a grant application. Basically tells what we're going to be doing and like what our goals are from an enforcement standpoint. It's going to be like, how many inspections are you going to do? How many citations per inspection are going to be there? Those types of. That's probably a little bit much, but yeah, like how many inspections are going to be done? And then on the consultation side, we do the exact same thing. We say we're going to do our annual goal of doing for consultations is 800. We say we're going to do 800 consultation visits over the course of the year. So, and then basically federal OSHA comes in. We have a very good working relationship with federal OSHA, and they come in on a quarterly basis. We meet, we sit down, we go through all of our goals, and we say this is where we're at, every quarter, and this is where we're going to be, at the end of the year.
All right. Is everybody awake now? Yeah. All right. So I get one. So I've always been on the other side of the table on the folks being enforced. What's helpful to know is that Minnesota OSHA regulations are largely mirror the federal regulations. There are a couple ones where they are different. And so it's important to identify where those distinctions are. One that is relevant to the cannabis industry is the Employee Right to Know program. So the Office of Cannabis Management in their regulations specifically calls out that the, I want to say that it's the manufacturers and the cultivators, but at least the manufacturers are required to have a written employee right to know program. That's referencing the Minnesota OSHA one. Very, very similar to the federal hazard communication standard. These are both related to safety data sheets and the chemicals that are used at your sites, the nutrients, the cleaners, the whatnot, but they're not exactly the same. And so there are a few of those where there's a little bit of a difference. Minnesota OSHA's website is fantastic. It identifies where there's a difference. They have templates for their programs, but just to know that if you go with federal, you're probably 95% of the way there. But it's also helpful to go do a quick check over at Minnesota OSHA and make sure that you're not missing anything.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So they sent me a couple of links to different things like templates. So like she said, you can literally download a template and fill it in, and there's that section complete. So they try to make it real simple for you, and so don't overcomplicate it. And then also, as Ryan was saying, like there's the federal level in all laws are going to be a little bit more general, and then each state can choose to be more restrictive and more specific and have state-specific laws. And so that's where MNOSHA comes in. There's federal OSHA, everyone has to comply across the land, great. But what do you have to do specifically for Minnesota? So that's where the MNOSHA website, and again, we'll have a follow-up email with all of these resources, so scan the QR code, sign up, and you'll get all the things. So yeah, there's federal, state, and then within the state, Ryan, can you alluded to it already, but can you talk a little bit more about the free consulting-based preliminary audit version sector, which is a separate sector from the enforcement division? As you stated before, I'm not sure if you caught that, but as a consultant, he will come into your business and he doesn't have to report that to the enforcement division. He's not going to come in and go, oh, I see this thing, we're getting the enforcement people here. They're different divisions and they don't get to, by law, they don't get to share information about you. So this service is free, it's a consultation, it's private, has nothing to do with you being enforced upon by OSHA. It is all, they want you to be successful. They want free and privacy and transparency. Am I too loud?
Yeah, it's coming out of them.
Oh, okay. See, I'm a scientist, not a, whatever people who do this are. Check. Is this better? There we go. Better?
Or you maybe hold it a little further away from your mouth.
A little bit farther away. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit more about the voluntary consulting, preliminary, pre-audit base versus the smackdown, and then he also said something about if you do get an enforcement check, which is a random check that has nothing to do with the voluntary consultant coming out there, it would be just in the stars that it happened, right? He's not telling on you, but they can come inspect you at any time, so you have to expect that as well.
Yeah, so our services, they are confidential, they're free, they are by request only. So you as an employer, and that's one thing that I think is super, super important to understand too, right? So where OSHA looks to see, is there an employer-employee relationship, right? So if you have employees, you are going to be covered by OSHA, right? So from our standpoint, we look at it and we say it's by request only. So you as an individual, company, employer has to contact OSHA consultation and make a request for us to come out there. And I always preface, right, it is a free service, but so like if we come out and we identify a hazard, your obligation is to correct that hazard within a certain period of time, right? So we'll set abatement deadlines to say like, okay, you're gonna fix this within 14 days, you're gonna fix this within 21 days, whatever that is. So, but that is your obligation, is to correct the hazard within a given period of time. Where now you could use a private consultant and totally fine, right? And they might identify a hazard. That doesn't mean you have to fix it, right? So like when OSHA enforcement comes out, they're going to, and they identify a hazard, They could say, okay, this is a hazard, you have an employee exposure to a hazard, there's an employer-employee relationship. We're going to, there's a standard that applies, and we're going to cite you. That citation carries a monetary penalty, and you also still have to fix it, right? So that's the differences between OSHA compliance and OSHA consultation. Is when we identify a hazard that is, we cite, it does not carry a monetary penalty. It merely carries an abatement, right? So you have to agree. And we make that abundantly clear whenever anybody makes a request, because we say, that's great, we're going to come out here. The likelihood of us coming out to a site and not identifying anything is pretty unlikely, right? So we have, like I said, 17 very highly qualified safety and health professionals that's what they do. They go through and identify hazards. So that's the biggest difference. That's essentially the difference between the two programs.
Great, thank you for that clarification. So yeah, it is voluntary, it is confidential, it is upon request. They won't just come out there unless you call them out there. I did this with my business back in California. I had them come in to preliminarily audit me and say, what would happen if somebody came in to enforce me and let me correct those right away. Fortunately, in the 10 years of my business, I never had an OSHA inspector ever come and inspect me, but I was ready for 10 years. It never happened, but it could happen, and you just don't know, and that's the point. But I still ran my business as if. You just never know what's going to come out and, slap you on the wrist, and hopefully it's gentle, so do your due diligence. So then, Cathy and Daniel, you guys are both industrial hygienists and safety professionals. Can you tell me a little bit, what's the difference between when Ryan would come out as a free consultant for OSHA versus a paid consultant such as yourselves? What's the difference between somebody hiring you or getting the free service, or both? Should they be getting both, all and everything? And what is it to be an industrial hygienist? What does that mean in a safety professional? Can you speak a little bit more to that? There's a couple questions in one.
All right, so yeah, an industrial hygienist is we're trying to evaluate, identify, and control hazards in the workplace. That could be chemicals, that could be heat related, that could be vibration related, a lot of different types of hazards that we want to address, air quality as well, look at your ventilation, and then confirm that it's meeting the proper code and what it was initially made out to be. So that's kind of an overall, in a nutshell. Doing a lot of air sampling as well to verify that the employee exposures in the workforce are not being overexposed based off of Minnesota OSHA permissible exposure limits, or any of the voluntary guidelines such as the ACGI TLV and the MNOSHA RELs. So when you have a consultant come out, first you usually have a question or concern you want to address. So we'll come out there and we will look at your facility and evaluate and identify the concern. Or it could be that we also just want to do a broad site visit and an inspection of your OSHA regulations, your standards, your training, your chemicals, everything like that. So a couple of different types of inspections that we can come out and do, either just a broad overall OSHA programs, or we can just do a specific hazard you want to address. From a standpoint of us versus consultation, I've never actually been out with OSHA consultation before, so I can't really talk on that, but kind of like what Ryan was saying, if you have us come out, we help address, identify the problem, come up with a solution, but we can't enforce you to actually do that. We can work with you to come up with that solution and, in a feasible way, and maybe work with our regulators directly on your behalf to see if that correction is going to be proper before them actually knowing about it, and then putting that compliance enforcement on you.
And to Dan's, that's a really great point, because when it comes to when it comes to us identifying hazards, we're going to tell you this is what the standard says. It's your obligation to abate that. Now these guys are going to help you through what that abatement really looks like. So if we say like, hey, you don't have a right to know program, or you don't have some written program, or this machine is unguarded, we can say, okay, we're going to address this with a citation. You have to fix that item. Where these guys can actually really kind of walk you through what that looks like, whether it's developing a program or identifying a specific vendor that can create machine guarding, those types of things. So.
And so I was just going to a couple of specific examples. So coming back to personal protective equipment, there are templates that exist. So one of the ways that we can help you, people like us can help you, is either we can write the program for you, or we can do coaching for a program that you have written. So like when I started my small business, I took a drafted terms and condition contract to my lawyer, who redlined it, and it was a much lower cost. So there are ways of adjusting the way the service is provided based on how much work you're willing and able to do. Also, if we stay in personal protective equipment, there's personal protective equipment hazard assessment that's required. You can do it yourself, or it's something you can hire somebody to do. There's a selection of getting the right gloves, or the right respirator, or the right whatever. But it's really kind of working through it with you as far as figuring out what's the right size solution, right size program for your business. And so I wrote program development, product selection, also training. And so I think your company does this quite a bit, which is draft and deliver training and then track that training. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can get that. It really just depends on how much do you want to do versus how much coaching do you want, and there's a continuum in there.
Great. What I heard was that MNOSHA can help identify your deficiencies, whereas a consultant, professional, can help you develop programs that will be ongoing to make sure those deficiencies are corrected and don't occur again, training your employees, having a training program, all of that. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And then for Cathy and Daniel, what are the most common injuries and hazards this is where you'll reference the sheet I handed out to you, some of the most common hazards that you're going to find in a cannabis workspace, whether it's cultivation, manufacturing. So also not all hazards apply to both. You might have a hazard in cultivation that you would not find in manufacturing and vice versa. So can you kind of go over typical common hazards in cannabis, and then also kind of bigger picture, injuries like slip and fall, ergonomics, things like that, and kind of tailored to what we're dealing with here in the cannabis industry.
So I'll start with the first question at the beginning was around common injuries. So one of the things, I'm on a national cannabis industry health and safety working group, and from that group I was able to get information that the top injuries they're seeing reported, and again, it's how well is it being reported, would be repetitive trauma, repetitive stress. So if you think about the clippers, and there's a lot of hand motion, and so that can, I can imagine that strain adds up. That's also one, if you think about how that work gets designed, that if you can do that with lower risk, you can probably also do more. So there's a productivity opportunity there. Another common injury is around sprains and strains. So there's some heavy lifting that's going on with the product, or with the nutrients, or the whatever that's getting moved around. And so those sprains and strains show up. Is there a way that we can do that work to reduce the likelihood of those injuries? Is there mechanical equipment or aid devices or two-person lift? And then the third one that shows up is around allergens. And this is one, when I talk to people in the industry, they talk about it organic, and we're not using a lot of hazardous chemicals, so we shouldn't have any of those chemical type injuries people think of with asthma. And what they're seeing is work-related asthma coming from the cannabis dust. So if you don't have local exhaust on your bud trimmer, that dust can really collect and there's been at least 2 recorded fatalities associated with cannabis dust, associated with the work-related asthma. And so if you have employees that are showing that they have an allergy to the dust, to the plant, that's something that needs to be taken seriously and controlled, and potentially they need to do a different task or work in a completely different space in the building. The fatality that happened in Massachusetts was something that they knew they had a problem, and they kept trying to solve it, and they kept trying to solve it. They were all trying to do the right thing, and she eventually succumbed to an asthma attack and died. So just something to really take seriously as you have people that report if they're having something like an allergic reaction. Do you want to take the common hazards? You gotta get a mic. Gotta get a mic too.
Mike, that's a question? Yeah.
Okay, raise your hand first. Yes, I call upon you. Do you have a question? Yeah, and if you could do it on the mic, because we are recording this, and then we'll be able to hear you better. Yes, use my mic and then hand it back.
And can you give us your name?
Hi, my name is Mason, also in the health and safety industry. I had a question about the allergen cases. Were these people with pre-existing asthma conditions, or were these was there an onset period where someone developed an allergy along that line? Would there ever be a case to consider sensitization to cannabis dusts?
So, recent article published in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine, it's both new onset and aggravated asthma. So it is a sensitizer. It is so you can, like a bee sting, if you think about your first bee sting, maybe it didn't get too bad, and then you know that guy that if they get stung, you gotta, they carry an EpiPen, but they didn't start that way. And so it can get worse and get aggravated. So it's both. Thanks, Mason.
I would just add slips, trips, and falls regarding any wet flooring, not having proper footwear, having any cords ran throughout the workplace, causing a trip. I see that in warehouses all the time. Then also if you have any standing water running with having any electrical cords through that, then I have electrical concern there as well.
Great. Can you also, let's see. I kind of wanted to stay on that for a second. I remember I was working in a grow shop where we had to deal with forklifting pallets of nutrients into trucks, on and off trucks, and we had to have a whole worker safety just on forklifts, right? And in the handout, there was a picture of a guy who had been on a forklift and was up by electrical power lines, and it was the aftermath of said situation, so you can imagine what the picture was of, and they were like, we all need to pay attention. It was shocking to me. They're like, whoa, you're just gonna start off with that? They're like, this is a serious thing. A lot of things can happen. You can be electrocuted, things can fall on you, you can slip, trip, and fall, hit your head. Something that you don't really even think of. Back in the legacy concept of cannabis, we've got bamboo stakes, we have rebar. That rebar is hiding behind the trees. You bend down to take care of your plant, and you get jacked in the face with rebar because it's hiding in the plant. That needs to be sticking up above the plant. It needs to have a big red flag. I've seen a lot of stuff happen because it was not regulated. So there is a reason for regulation, and I've seen the other side of it. And you have no recourse, you have no ability to take care of yourself or to have advocacy on a legal level. So being in a legal market means that you get to have legal recourse you get to be safe in the workplace. That's a big deal. I've seen a lot of not safe stuff happen, and so this is very near and dear to my heart. Thank you for expressing that. What was my point in that story? I don't recall, but yeah, why don't we do that? Okay, so on the last page of your handout, this is actually a great place to go now, is we have this little triangle hierarchy of controls. You see the very, very bottom is PPE. PPE means personal protective equipment. That is the last thing that you should do, not the first thing you should do. It's very important, don't get me wrong, but you know, there's a lot of things leading up to putting on those gloves and putting on that respirator that could happen prior to putting on that respirator, right? Venting out the allergens and putting on the respirator and et cetera. So Cathy, do you want to go over the hierarchy of controls and explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so as you can see with the triangle on the back is talking about the hierarchy of controls. So what that looks like is the most effective way to reduce risk, to reduce the likelihood of injury is to eliminate. If it's just not there, it's not going to happen. Y'all are cannabis manufacturers, so cannabis is going to be there. So then we get to, I think the next, is there an opportunity around substitution? Then we get to engineering controls. So as we look at engineering controls, with that bud trimmer, if we stay on the bud trimmer and the cannabis dust example, they do come with a local exhaust attachment. If you don't use it, it doesn't work. And so that's one where as you have the opportunity to put in that engineering control, especially now as you're all building out your operations, is to design it with that end process in mind so that you have those controls in place, because they're more likely to get used correctly and they're more likely to be effective. If after we get through engineering controls, then we get to administrative controls, things like training, putting up a sign. Who remembers the training that any of you have? Like, I don't. And so you can imagine how ineffective that may be, and that's why we want to make sure that we're using engineering controls early on to make sure that we're controlling those risks. The other thing that, like if you put a sign on it like, hey, don't stick your finger in there, probably not that effective, especially if you're exhausted or you're trying to get a bunch of stuff done. And so we all make mistakes. I know I make mistakes. Luckily, I'm at a computer, so I just go through and I Control F and I get it fixed. But if you're working with, again, back to, let's say, those nutrients that are corrosive, you don't necessarily get to take that back. And so then the last one would be personal protective equipment. It is going to be the least effective because nobody likes wearing respirators. Nobody likes wearing the gloves. Nobody likes wearing safety glasses. We all remember COVID. Nobody enjoyed any of that. But so that when we talk about PPE, it's making sure, yes, if you do need to wear it, we get the right equipment and we get it sized for the workers that are using it. Ryan and I look a little different. I bet we need different size things and different equipment so that it's going to be as effective as it needs to be. And so when we look at that hierarchy of controls, the best time to be thinking through that is at the beginning as you're setting up your operation. Walk the floor, walk that operation, try to say, like, what are some of the things that as you and your workers are looking at it that could go wrong? I mean, you're not gonna think of everything, you're really not. But some of the stuff that like, all right, well, is there an engineering way that we could do it? Hell, do we even need to do it? Is there a better way? And so if there's a way that we can make it easier, you're probably going to get more productivity and fewer injuries. Do you want more?
I always want more. Do you have anything to add to that? I do have a couple other questions, but if you have something to add to that one, I'm happy.
So I'll just add, for the substitution of the hierarchy of controls, I've had facilities that have dropped their solvents down to a less hazardous solvent, so like trichloroethylene, dropped it down to ethyl acetate, a lot less hazards. Respirator hazards aren't always there if you're not doing TCE. So that's a good thing I'm thinking about is, dropping down your hazards, to then maybe it's just a PPE requirement at the very end. You can't fully control that emission. So, but no.
Yeah, that was a great point for the substitution. Does that all make sense to everybody out there, this hierarchy of where to start and how to get to the end? Because it seems opposite, like boots on the ground. We see people with the goggles and the masks and the gloves, and we see that first. But a lot of stuff can happen leading up to that, and the substitution is great. I had to look at that in my laboratory. Do I have to deal with hazardous material? Is there something else that doesn't have to be hazardous waste that I can use? So for worker safety, but also as a business, I want to be profitable. I don't want to have to pay for extra disposal, storage to maintain it, all of that. So is there something else I can do to make this easier? So that's great. Another question I have for Daniel down there, you were talking about like permits. So there's the OSHA and there's the hierarchy of controls and there's what's required on that level, but you might need to get a permit depending on where you're located and what you are wasting, as to whether you have an air quality permit. If you're wasting out into the atmosphere, then other people on the outside could be affected. They need to know, you need a permit to exhaust that. And then wastewater, a lot of these indoor facilities, you're gonna have a lot of stuff coming off and you can't just dump it all down the drain. How do I dispose of that? So when do I and when don't I need to go get this permit? Or how do I know if I am a candidate that needs one or not? Is that hiring one of you folks or getting MNOSHA involved, or is there looking up on regulation?
So permitting is very broad. So for instance, like hazardous waste is governed by the MPCA if you're outside the metro area. If you're within Scott, Dakota, Washington, Ramsey, Anoka, Hennepin, and Carver, I think that's the second, then they will govern their own hazardous waste. So if you ever have any questions regarding hazardous waste, you reach out to your county rather than MPCA for any sort of questions on permitting, license, application, annual reporting, stuff like that. So that's going to be, so if you're trying to address your actual hazardous waste, I highly recommend utilizing the U of M Chemical Waste Registry. So if you type that into your favorite search engine, U of M Chemical Waste Registry, they do provide a pretty good output on what the waste codes are for certain type of waste. To help you get a better understanding of, is this a RCRA, which is hazardous waste, or is it non? And then do further research to confirm that their answer is accurate. That's a good way of identifying that. There's also different types of, if you have a chemical mixture, there is ways of identifying, such as ignitability. Is it within a certain flash point, that waste that would be part of the hazardous waste? Is it corrosive? Is it less than, or is it 2 or lower for pH, or 12.5 or above? And that's just chemical tests you can do to confirm that is a part of that characteristic of the hazardous waste. There's also different type of tests that you can do, is send in a sample to the lab to get it analyzed to confirm that it is hazardous waste or not. Or there are different listed codes that will just be based off of the actual chemical that's in there, such as trichloroethylene has its own F code, I believe. So there's a large, MPCA does have a pretty good website on how you evaluate your hazardous waste to help identify if it is hazardous waste or not. From a wastewater standpoint, so if you are within the 7 county metro area, Metropolitan Council will be the one you want to reach out to regarding any questions that you do have. Outside of that, you're going to have a POTW, a publicly owned treatment works. So you want to reach out to your local wastewater facility that will be getting your waste downstream if it is sewer. And you want to get an approval from them regarding how much waste you're sending down there. And then any additional questions, they could provide you a temporary approval. They could provide you a full-blown industrial discharge permit. There's a few different things, and then there's also like a one-time permit that they would allow if it is a seldom activity. So that's one way of identifying that. There's not really a good way for me to tell you that you're going to need it or not. It's more of identifying how much you're disposing, what's in the actual discharge, and then getting additional feedback from that agency that's going to be getting that waste. From an air permitting standpoint, I haven't really been involved with your industry that much, so I don't know exactly what you have from a standpoint of ventilation. But that'll be based off of your heating. So if you do have diesel or natural gas heating, that will come into effect regarding how much you're emitting into the air, as well as your solvent use and other chemical use as well that's exhausting out and then also however you are capturing that such as filtering system. If you have a large VOC emitter, then you might have some sort of emission source on the rooftop that's capturing it, such as an afterburner. But that's probably a lot larger scale than what we're starting out at. So I would have to kind of look at your facility and get a better understanding of what you have for equipment to get an understanding of if an air permit would be required. It would be probably required for larger operations. Starting out smaller operations, it might not meet any of the criteria for a permit.
Great. So, as he was saying, there's a lot of different codes and different places to look, and it's like, where do I start? It can turn you around in circles, right? So, how should operators approach hazard identification, prevention planning? Which core safety program should every cannabis operator prioritize? There's some questions you should ask yourself, and if you can ask yourself these questions, then you can start asking other people, starting at the local level. They might escalate you up to the state level, or they might say, hey, we can help you here at the local level, but always start local. But you know your operation better than anybody else. You are your business. So are you a cultivator? Are you a manufacturer? What hazards do you foresee in your own operation? How do you intend to reduce them? Reduce the exposure to them, mitigate them, control them. So how do I make it not happen in the first place? Well, first we'll say, what is a potential hazard? How do I stop that hazard from happening? Then, whoops, the hazard happened, so what am I gonna do about it once it does happen? So if you can do those three things, hazard that could happen, hazard make it not happen, hazard did happen, what will we do about it? Is kind of a very general way of looking at it. So there's all these codes and the NACE codes and the websites, and do you need to talk to every single one of them, or are there two specifically? So there's a self-identification of who you are and what your hazards are. Extension cord tripping, the repetitive injury, not exhausting, all of that stuff. Are you indoors? Are you outdoors? Is there sun exposure? Are we working outdoors on a farm? We have sun exposure. Are we inside under LED lights? We need glasses so that we don't burn out our retinas. So thinking all of that through, and then once you have that, then what type of PPE do you need in order to protect your workers for those activities? I'm going to ask, each one of you, this will be our final questions. We're at the top of the hour. We started a little bit late, so I'll just go forward another 5 minutes or so. But, how should operators approach hazard identification and prevention? And I'll just, stimulate this with that. I work in agriculture, and so on every label of every pesticide and every fertilizer, well, maybe not every fertilizer, but every pesticide, there's a giant fold-out that starts as a little square and ends up the size of your room. That will tell you what PPE to use for that pesticide. And then you open the second pesticide, and they might have a different set of PPE for that pesticide. And now I'm going to combine those two pesticides, and so I might have to double up on your PPE. So most of the things that you do and use will have a user manual, will have some sort of informational guide to say, when using this equipment, make sure that ... right? So can each of you guys go down the line and kind of illuminate for us how people would find what my hazards are, what do I do about it, what PPE, where do I find it, where do I look for it? Besides giving the resources that we're gonna give to everybody afterwards, a whole heap of links and stuff, but generally walk us through the process if you were an operator approaching this yourself.
That's tough. And I can't remember if it was Sarah or Cathy who had said, you guys know your businesses better than anybody else, right? So that you might not know, and I'm going to speak to it from an OSHA standpoint. So obviously we have rules on top of rules, and there's regulations, from machine guarding to lockout, tagout to forklift training. The best thing that you can do really is to reach out to a safety and health professional and ask questions, right? And and I think trying to understand, like, do your research on what the hazards you are going to be exposed to. And I can tell you, if you have electricity in your building, there's potentially electrical hazards, and we have standards, right? If you have machines, there's guarding standards. If you're working with chemicals, there's standards on top of that. Even with the personal protective equipment, like, when is it required? How do you have to use it? Are you exposed to an overhead hazard? Do you need to wear a hard hat? Are you exposed to flying chips and sparks? You need to wear, eye and face protection. Like, there are so many rules and regulations, and I think the best thing to do is ask questions. Like Sarah mentioned, there's resources. Our website is full of resources. It'll talk to you about any different topic that you could probably be exposed to. And if there isn't one, and you contact someone in our office, they will try to direct you to the right place where to gather some information if they don't already know. But I think it's doing a hazard assessment of your work, right? Like, identifying, is there in my facility, is there slip, trips, and falls hazards? Is there ergonomic related hazards? And then trying to understand what those things mean.
So when I worked solely at a manufacturing site, I always thought it was very important for me to understand the chemicals that are being utilized in the facility, and that comes from purchasing. So if I'm purchasing a chemical, I want to know what the hazard is before it enters my facility. So then I already know that I need PPE for it. I already have the PPE ready to go. I have the spill materials ready to go in case there's a spill in my facility. I'm storing this near a certain spot where I have an eye wash station already for corrosive chemicals. So stuff like that, I always want to know that I have it really ready to go before it's been put in the process in the facility. And I also do have the facility data sheet readily available now that I have it in my facility for all my employees to see. I also think it's very important from a risk assessment standpoint is to observe someone else doing the process. You might think it's easy if you're seeing yourself do. You might miss a lot of different hazards that you're seeing from a broad standpoint. So doing that, doing something like a task-based risk assessment, observing someone else doing the work. If you have the ability to, with numerous employees, just have yourself look at someone and watch them do it. Then you can identify different hazards that you don't even see yourself doing. So that's what I would probably state. And then also, kind of like what Ryan was saying, there's a lot of good publications on the OSHA website, but I also like OSHA Safety Lines. It's a quarterly publication that's sent via email. And it's good to just know kind of what are the trends in OSHA, is there any updates and regulations, and kind of some overview of what the injuries and illness results have been for the past quarter and past year. So I think that's very good just to get an understanding of what's going on in the industry, because you are in a very, you're in your own kind of bubble industry. What's kind of going on with OSHA as a whole, and what are they seeing from all industries to get a better understanding of how to protect your site specifically.
So what they said, and then I'll take it from maybe from an operator perspective. One of the things that I like to do when I do the best work when I'm actually out on the floor, but talking to the operator, talking to the workers, questions like, well, what task do you really hate doing? What task? They're like, oh, I gotta do that tomorrow, oh, I hate that. Well, maybe there's some hazards there we should be working on. What do you warn new people about? All of you are very seasoned and experienced. Are there certain things when it's like, oh, we got Joe's starting tomorrow, Hovde's coming in later, gotta make sure she doesn't mess that up or get hurt doing that. You may not get hurt doing it because you're amazing, but what's the new person going to get hurt doing because they are likely to make a mistake? And then on like some questions like, and this was a four Ds of dodgeball, but as you're looking at the test, talking about that observational process and talking to workers is, tasks that are dirty. If I see dirty, disorganized work sites, that's a work site that's probably got injuries. Whether or not they're reported, I don't know, but they're probably got injuries because they got a bunch of stuff to trip over, they're not putting things away. So dirty, disorganized, different? Are you doing something different than what we normally do? Are we doing a different type of extraction? Probably more likely to have an injury from that. And then dangerous. So again, back to like, I focus on chemicals, as you can tell. Dan and I spend a lot of time in that space. But there are, even, you know, in the organic family, there are hazardous chemicals that are being used that are corrosive to eyes, which means burn them out. And so as you're looking at, you know, what are those products, and making sure that you've got a plan for that.
Great, thank you guys so much. So there is 5 more hours worth of information that we could cover, but we must wrap it up so we can all have our mingling happy hour after this. But I do want to toss one very important message out there that we didn't talk about, that none of this matters if you don't have employees. If you do not have an employee-employer relationship, this whole conversation is moot. Am I correct in saying that, or not completely? But I'm gonna finish with, when I was the owner of my business, they were like, if you don't have employees, it's just you and your business partner, we don't care if you get hurt. Sorry, but you have an employee, we care if they get hurt. So I might not be completely correct in saying it's irrelevant if you have no employees, but there is a lot less that you have to do if you have no employees / subcontractors who then have to be responsible for themselves. So there's like an arm's length thing. So maybe you guys can speak a little bit to, when do I have to adhere to OSHA? When does it matter? When does it not matter?
I would just say, you may not hurt an employee, but you can hurt yourself. Like, you can still burn your eyeballs out.
You can, but
So
you're not going to get sued.
You may not have enforcement action, but it may affect other things about your business, productivity, sustainability, like all of those other things. So whether or not Ryan's friends come over and write you a citation, it's still the right business practice. And so there are other things that are probably driving that, like your insurance, or if you can't see, you can't work, and you're not going to be very profitable.
Right, so there's a general, to your life it matters, but to OSHA, and when they're going to crack down and give you your citation, pull your license, that's the world in which I'm speaking. It does matter to all of us if we have eyeballs, for sure. But MNOSHA or the OSHA isn't going to come and crack you down, and OSHA won't take your
You
license.
still have to worry about the subcontractors.
Oh, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how subcontractors versus employees come into play, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm sorry for taking your time, but this is really good stuff.
It is really going to be on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean, and I couldn't give you like a specific example, but that is what it is. I mean, but in a nutshell, that's what OSHA looks for, is an employer-employer relationship. If you don't have an employer-employer relationship, then really OSHA standards do not apply in that situation. But again, when you think about people coming onto your facility, being cognizant that that is a subcontractor that you have out there. There is a multi-employer worksite policy, so you potentially could have, be in control of that subcontractor. So it is going to be, again, it's such a case-by-case specific situation that really it's best practice is comply with the standards, whether you have employers or not.
And a 1099 employee, that's an example of a subcontractor?
Yes, yep, 1099 subcontractor, not a W-2 employee of the company. That's the difference there. Okay, we've run out of time. If you guys have questions, these folks will stay a little bit afterwards and answer them directly for you. And then again, I'll follow up with an email with all the 5 million different resources we have for you. But at the end of the day, talk to these folks. They will help you through the gauntlet of workplace safety life. Thank you so much. Signing off.